Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome back to our shiurim on the halachos of raising children. This is our fifth week together, and we are moving now in the direction of Hilchos Shabbos. We've spoken about a bunch of different topics already, but the last few weeks in particular we've been focusing on one topic specifically, which is the topic of la'afrushe me'isura. Meaning we spoke about the mitzvah of chinuch, we spoke about the mitzvah of chinuch, where it applies, when it applies, to whom does it apply, what the source is for the mitzvah of chinuch. We spoke about all those things in the first 2 weeks. Then we sort of transitioned into the discussion of not necessarily chinuch, of positive training on positive mitzvahs or on negative mitzvahs, not necessarily training in terms of chinuch, but also we spoke about the idea that even if you're not constantly or currently at that moment involved in the mitzvah of chinuch itself, but if you see a child of yours that's doing an issur, that's doing an avera, are you obligated to separate them from doing so, correct? Then we move from there into the more proactive form of that issur, which was safinan biadayim, or lo sa'achilim. The pasuk tells us in 3 places that you're not allowed to feed the issur literally to the child. You can't put the issur into the mouth. You can't feed them the McDonald's. You can't cause them to do the issur proactively. Last week we also got into a little bit the parameters of what that means to proactively do so. Does that mean you literally have to put it into their mouth? Does that mean you just make it available to them? That's some of the things we spoke about last week in the realm of discussing fasting on Yom Kippur and the like. Now we're moving towards, because we had a sort of a segue into it and it was basically requested also, we're moving towards the halachos of Shabbos. Now Shabbos is very, very unique. Shabbos is unique because we spoke early in the the very first year probably, we spoke of the concept of chinuch by Shabbos in terms of Kiddush and Havdalah. Remember that? We spoke of the mitzvah of doing Kiddush, doing Havdalah, but Shabbos obviously predominantly, the way we associate it with it, has 39 malachos and a whole bunch of derabanans and some other things that are prohibited on Shabbos. They're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So in those instances of the isurim, of the forbidden actions on Shabbos, things that a person is not allowed to do, so do you have to train your child not to do those things? So presumably, based on everything we've been discussing until now, when a child is very, very young, we assume that ein mitzvah la'afrisho, you're not chayiv to separate him. At a certain age, when the child is old enough to understand, to recognize the issur, you're going to have to separate him from the issur, you're going to have to prevent him from doing the violation. But until that point, you're not going to have to. And all the rules should follow suit with everything we've discussed in the last few weeks. But if you look in source number 1, you'll see a Mishnah. It starts with a Mishnah and it goes into a Gemara. The Mishnah says something which seems somewhat perplexing, somewhat surprising, somewhat catching us off guard. Let's read the Mishnah together. The Mishnah says, Nachrisha ba lichbos. You have a guy, a non-Jew, who comes to lichbos means? To put out a fire, yeah, exactly. To turn off in modern Hebrew, right? To put out the lights. In the olden days, they didn't have electricity, so it was putting out a fire, exactly, to extinguish. So you have a fire that's blazing, and a non-Jew comes to put out the fire. Ein omrim lo kaveh v'al kaveh. We don't say to him, don't do it, and we don't say to him, do it. You can't say to him, do it, why not? What is that? Well, you're getting benefit from doing what? Amir la'akum, telling a non-Jew to do a malacha for you. Excellent. And you're not allowed to benefit from that malacha either. Excellent. So you can't tell him to do it. You also don't tell him not to do it. Why? He doesn't have a chiv to keep Shabbos. In fact, if a non-Jew keeps Shabbos, it's an issur. It's not allowed. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that he's chayiv misa. If a non-Jew keeps Shabbos inappropriately, he's obligated with the death penalty. Okay, it's not a literal death penalty. It's a death misa b'dei shamayim, not enacted by a beis din, but it's not allowed. So ain't shvisas an alein. You don't have to make sure this random stranger keeps Shabbos. He's not Jewish. He's not commanded in it. Let him put out the fire. Says the Gemara Mishnah like this: Aval katan sheba lichbos ein shomin lo. But if a katan comes, a minor, a child comes to put out the fire, ein shomin lo, meaning you don't allow him to do so. You don't allow him to put out the fire. Why? Mipnei sheshvisaso aleihen. Because his shvisa, his cessation from malacha, his rest of Shabbos, aleihen, is on them, meaning on you, on the adult, to make sure that he keeps Shabbos. Now we're starting to get mixed cues over here. What do you mean? I thought if he's young enough, you don't have to separate him. It sounds like over here, if the child's doing this malacha of putting out a fire on Shabbos, so you have to make sure he doesn't do it. Why? Shouldn't this be all the regular rules of chinuch and la'afrushe me'isura and safina bi'adayim? How does it all come together? So the Gemara is bothered by something similar. So the Gemara says, again, you and I are asking it this way. We know the halacha is that if a child is about to do an avera, you do not have to separate him at a young age, or if you're not the father at a certain age, right? because not mitzvah la'afrisha. You don't have to separate a child who's about to do an isser. So the Gemara here says, but our Mishnah is a proof to the opposite. Our Mishnah proves that you do have to stop such a katan from doing a malacha, because it says he's about to put out a fire and you have to tell him not to do so. So the Gemara says, no, it's not such a proof. It's not such a raya. Why? What's our case in our Mishnah? This is the key line. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bekatan ha'oseh l'das aviv. The case that we're talking about is one in which, Rabbi Yochanan says a very cryptic, enigmatic answer over here, it's one in which the katan is oseh l'das aviv. How would you just translate that very literally? A child, katan.
With his father's knowledge or for his father?
Ooh, excellent. Okay, two possibilities. One was with his father's knowledge. That was the first possibility. That's a little bit strange because what does that answer? It's always with your knowledge. You see what's happening. The second possibility was fascinating. The second possibility was on his account, basically, right? For the father, on his behalf, on behalf of the father. Lidas of it, on behalf of the father. And in fact, if you look at Rashi over here, and the Ritva says the same thing, and the Nimuka Yosef and Yivama says the same thing. Rashi says al das of it. You see it indented in source number 1, right before number 2. Bekatan sheyada lahavchin she'akiboy zeh noach la'aviv. It's a child who knows how to discern and realize and recognize that this kiboy, this act of extinguishing the fire, is noach la'aviv. It's pleasant, it's a good, it's wanted by the father. Ve'oseh bishvilo. It's exactly what you just said, Eli. It's done on his behalf, for him, on account of the father. So in such a case, says Rabbi Yochanan, in fact, the father is obligated to stop the child from doing the malacha because the child is doing it on behalf of the father. What in the world is going on over here? Who cares whose behalf he's doing it on? So anyone have any suggestions on that? Look, the kid's doing it on his own, correct? What's that? So you're getting benefit? Okay, have we ever seen that before, getting benefit's an issue? What does this mean? Meaning, what were we bothered by? We're bothered that if the kid's doing it on his own accord, he's on his own volition, right? He's doing it on his own, he chose to do it. I'm not feeding him the Isser, I'm not telling him to do it, I'm not asking him to do it, I'm not putting it in his hands, so let him sin.
It's different.
Why is it different?
There's no benefit to you because he doesn't do it when he's eating something.
Good.
Here, there is a benefit to you or a possible non-benefit to you by him.
And therefore what? Finish the thought. And therefore what? Because Jojo really said the same point, the benefit issue. But what does that change? What does that change about our sugya? So let's think about it this way. Yeah?
For you to get benefit from it is the Isur. Now you're also doing Benavera.
Closer. If I don't tell my kid to do anything and he's doing it for himself, he wants to play in his room. We're going to get back to this. And he puts on the lights in the room to play. Okay, so he did his own Isser on Shabbos, correct? Stop him, don't stop him, subject to the regular rules. Let's say the kid looks at his father and says, my dad is going to be so proud of me when I put on these lights. Yeah, I know he wants to learn Torah right now. He can't see because it's dark in here. I'm going to put on the lights for him. Who made him do that Isser? Yeah, even though actively I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything. I didn't put the light switch in his hand. I didn't actively, safinan, feed it to him. But ultimately, if he's doing it for my benefit, because he knows I'm going to be proud, I'm going to be happy, he's doing it for daddy, so then it's really me who fed him the Isser. It's really me who gave him the Isser. So this is akin to me commanding him to do so.
Does that apply only to the father or any other?
Very good. So we'll have to come back to that soon, whether that should be limited to the father or not. We could say it's at least ostensibly it starts with the father because that's the most common case where a kid is doing something for the father. Could that apply in cases where we know the kid is doing it for a stranger? We could talk about that at some point, B'li Neder, if we get to it. But basically what these Rishonim are trying to tell us is that there's an Aldas Aviv that sort of changes the Tzura, changes what we're looking at over here. It's no longer the kid doing it on his own. It's you asking him to do it. You didn't actively say the words, you didn't verbalize it, but he knows what you want, he's doing it for you. That means you commanded him to do the Isser. That's Usser, just like any other Isser is Usser. That's Usser on Shabbos. Now, what's fascinating, if you look in source number 2, the Rishonim point this out, we have a pasuk in the Torah which tells us this, special by Shabbos. Now, basically, what we just described is a regular case of lo sa'achilum, no? Meaning, again, you can't feed a kid nevela, but if you see a kid eating nevela, you let him eat it. Let's just say, basically, without all the deals from the last week's, correct? Okay, but you can't put it into his mouth. But if you tell him, eat it, or he knows that you get really proud when he eats McDonald's, you're basically causing him to eat it, correct? Okay, that's what we just decided. So by Shabbos, he knows you want to put out the lights, he knows you want to put out the fire, and he does it, so he's doing it for you. It's as if you told him to do it, you commanded him to do it. I don't need a new pasuk, right? That's just lo sa'achilum. That's the regular Isser of don't feed kids Yisurim, don't cause them to Yisurim. Look in Parshas Yisro. Zachar es yom HaShabbos l'kadisho. We say this is Shabbos morning Kiddush, right? Zachar es yom HaShabbos l'kadisho. Sheish yom tav v'stisok l'mlachtecha. V'yom hashvi Shabbos la'Hashem elokecha. Lo yisasek kol melacha ata uvincha uvitecha. Says the pasuk, you shouldn't do malacha. Lo saskom malacha ata. Who else? Bincha, bitecha, you, your son, your daughter. Now your son and daughter might be 6, they might be 5, they might be 4. They're young children, but they shouldn't do malacha either. What do you mean? They're allowed to do anything. I mean, they don't have mitzvahs, they don't have averos. What are you talking about? Don't do malacha on Shabbos to a child, to a 5-year-old, to a 4-year-old, to a 2. What are you talking about? So apparently what the Rishonim understand over here is that, yeah, that's true if the child's doing his own malacha. He's putting on the lights for himself. He's 3 years old, 4 years old. He doesn't know the difference. No one's there to see it. It's not a big deal. He's not a mitzvah. He's not obligated to mitzvahs yet. But if he's doing it for you, if he's doing it on your behalf, that's lo saskom malacha ata uvin chobitecha. You can't allow your child to do a malacha on your account on Shabbos. Now still, why do you need another pasuk? That's just regular lo sa'achilim. We didn't really answer the question. We just showed that it's in the pasuk. But what's the point of having a separate pasuk for this? This is the regular case of don't cause your kid to do isurim. So to here, don't cause your kid to do isurim. Why is this any different? So look in source number 3. This is the tshuva from the Achiezer. The Sefer Achiezer was written by Reb Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, the great Gadol Ador he died during World War II. He died of disease. He died of old age, but he lived during the war. He was the basically undisputed Gadol Ador at the time, Reb Chaim Ozer Grodzinski in Vilna, and he wrote Tshuva's Achiezer. So in Chela Gimel, the Tshuva Achiezer is a very long Tshuva. This is just a tiny snippet over here where he quotes the following. Now he quotes from, let's see if we can figure this out together. He quotes from Vishamati, means I heard from, Alufi miudai, which sounds like it means, the person who I hold in high esteem, the person who I know very personally. Hagon Rav Chaim mi Volozhin. Have we heard of Rav Chaim from Volozhin? Yeah, so that sounds like Rav Chaim Volozhiner, right? Rav Chaim Volozhiner lived in he founded the Volozhin Yeshiva. He lived, he was already dead, I think, in 1820. So he was living in the 18th and 19th century, correct? So Rav Chaim Grodzinski, I just pointed out to you, lived when? He died in the mid, exactly. So it doesn't really make sense that he's quoting him, right? So who else is a Rav Chaim that went through Volozhin? Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. We've heard of Rav Soloveitchik from Boston, from Yeshiva University. We've heard of the Brisker Rav. That family dynasty all comes from the Beis HaLevi, and the Beis HaLevi's son, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik's son, was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik was like the founder of the way that all of the yeshivas learn Torah since then and for the rest of history. He just changed the way that the lumdus is achieved in the Beis Medrash. So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik taught. He was a Rebbe in the yeshiva in Volozhin. Nobody calls him Rav Chaim Volozhin. Nobody says that, but apparently he's quoting him here. You see in some of the contemporary books, they say Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski quotes from Rav Chaim Volozhiner. That doesn't really make any sense. I mean, it could be he quoted that he heard in the name of, but if you read the words, he says, Shamati, I heard, Mei Alufi Miudai, I heard it from him, and he refers to him as his friend, as someone he knows, as a contemporary, Rav Chaim from Volozhin. He has to be referring to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. So the contemporary Svarim, I think, Mani Daiti got it wrong. It really is referring to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, he told him the following idea. It's interesting, by the way. Rav Chaim Grodzinski was younger than Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik passed away in 1918. He lived, not a very long life before that. So he was a Rebbe in Volozhin Yeshiva when Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski was a student in the Volozhin Yeshiva. Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski was the same tkufa in Volozhin as Rav Shimon Shkop. They were both students of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. But when you read the Svarim, Rav Shechter Shlita always points this out, when you read the Svarim, this is a good example, he refers to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik almost like they were contemporaries, like they were friends or something. He was a student. He was, maybe he was an older student, but he was a student. So he refers to him as more of a contemporary, more of a colleague. This is one of those instances. So he quotes Rav Chaim Soloveitchik like this. Why do we need a separate pasuk for the isser of telling a child to do a malacha or having a child do a malacha on your behalf on Shabbos? It's like every other case of not having a kid do an isser for you. Why is this any different? So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik said like this. All isurim, if I cause a kid to do nevela, if I cause a kid to eat treif, so he did that avera, treif, and I did the isser of lo sa'achilim, correct? That's the case of every other instance. However, Shabbos is different than all other isurim. What do we call a machal Shabbos? Someone who violates Shabbos b'far hesti in a public setting, he gets the status of an oved avodah zarah. He gets the status of an akum, meaning he has a status as a non-Jew in some levels. In fact, we assume that such a person, if he would offer to do shchita, it would be problematic. We wouldn't necessarily accept karbanos from him. The Gemara in Chulin says there are many nafkaminas. There are practical differences to the fact that someone's a machal Shabbos. If you don't keep Shabbos, you're somewhat out of the club. So says Reb Chaim Soloveitchik like this: if I make a kid eat nevela, okay, so eat nevela, it's bad, and I did lo sachilim, I did the isser of feeding a child yisurim. But if I have a kid do malacha on Shabbos for me, you know what isser I violated? Shabbos. Not lo sa'achilim. I didn't violate the isser, the separate isser of feeding a child. No. I actually violated Shabbos, because you know what Shabbos means? Shabbos means you have to make sure not only that you don't do malacha, but that your kid doesn't do malacha. There's a famous story that took place in Brisk. We talked about Rav Chaim being in Volozhin. He was also in Brisk. He was the Rav of Brisk for the other half of his life. And there's a story that happened in Brisk, that the families always put the cholents in pots in a communal oven, a place where the communal oven was, and they would take it home before Shabbos and keep it warm until Shabbos day. And one Shabbos, the family forgot to bring the cholent out of the communal oven, and they had left it there over Shabbos. So on Shabbos day, the father very much wanted his cholent. He didn't feel comfortable not having cholent at lunch, and I guess it wasn't an option to go eat in the oven. So he couldn't carry. There was no Eruv to carry. It was outside on Shabbos. You're not allowed to carry if there's no Eruv. So he sent his young child, to go fetch the cholent and schlep it home to bring it home to eat. So I read this in the Sefer Uvdos van Hagos Beis Brisk, but so many accounts of this story. There are some variations in the story, but mostly go basically the following way. So he sent his young child to go get the cholent pot from the communal oven, and when Reb Chaim heard that this was happening, apparently he objected, and he said not only is it usher, but it's chilul Shabbos. It's chilul Shabbos, and he said that if someone who would do this and send their child to get the cholent pot and carry it through Rishus Rabbim on Shabbos, that person is going to be considered a mumar lechalal Shabbos, meaning his wine will be not allowed to be drunk if it was stam yain, if it wasn't the yain mavushal, and the guy touched it, you wouldn't be able to drink that wine anymore. He held that way. In fact, in one of the variations of the story, I think that in Chinuch on Hagos or Moshe Sternbach, he records that maybe this even happened, that the story went through, and Reb Chaim refused to drink the guy's wine. Okay, whether or not it actually happened, the point is that he did say that. He did discourage it very strongly, and the way he discouraged it, if you're paying attention, is that if you do this, you will be considered a mechal Shabbos, a violator of Shabbos. You're not just doing the isser of lo sa'achilim that we've been speaking about for the last few weeks. You're actually violating Shabbos. Why? Because the pasuk says lo sasa kol melacha ata uvincha uvitecha. It's viewed qualitatively as chilul Shabbos, and that's the chiddush that Reb Chaim Ozer Grzinski quoted from Chaim Soloveitchik. And that's the chiddush that in that story you see Reb Chaim Soloveitchik held of halacha l'maisa practically. He said if this guy would send his kid to get the cholent pot, he would be a mechal Shabbos for this reason, for what Reb Chaim Ozer is quoting for us in source number 3. That's the approach of the Achiezer, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and the Rishonim we saw until now. However, the Mishkanas Yaakov, Rabbi Yankala Karliner, he has a different approach, a slightly different approach to this topic, and he bases it on the Ramban. You have in source number 4, the Ramban, in that pasuk, says the Ramban, binchu bitecha means haketanim, the young ones, the young children. His hiranu b'shabbos shelo ya'asu habanim haketanim melacha lidatenu uvirtzonenu. There's a azhara, there's a warning. We're being admonished not to allow the children to do a malacha on our behalf. L'da'atenu ubertzonenu, right? That's your words, Eli. On our behalf, to our knowledge, right? On our behalf, ubertzonenu, for our pleasure, to serve us in our benefit. So that we should not allow a katan to do on Shabbos. So that, says the Mishkanas Yaakov, is something special. It's something different than usual. Usually what we say about an isser, when we say lo sa'achilim, we usually assume the isser is that you can't tell a kid not to do something. You can't tell a kid not to do something. So we saw that the Ritva, Rashi, Nimuki Yosef, all of them said that in the case that the Gemara is talking about, Katana Osa Das Aviv, it means that, in this case it's so obvious that's what the father wants that it's as if the father commanded it, correct? Says Mishkanas Yaakov, no, you don't even need that. Shabbos is different. By all other cases of Isurim, as long as you tell the kid to do it, you're over on the lo sa'achilim, you've fed him the Isser, you've caused him to do the Isser. As long as you've implied very strongly, hinted to him that he should do it, that's going to be problematic. Feed it to him, that's going to be problematic. On Shabbos, you don't even have to hint it. He doesn't have to know that you want it, he has to be doing it for you. As long as he's doing it on your behalf, even if it's not as if I commanded him to do it, as long as he's doing it on your behalf, that's the Isser of Lo Sasa Kom Lacha Ato Vin Chavitecha. That's an Isser Daraisa. Look in source number 5, the Mishnah Berurah in his Sefer Sharat Zion, the footnotes to the Mishnah Berurah, he said this as well. that the Isser of Lo Saskom Malacha Ato Vin Chavitecha is violated simply when a child in your home does Malacha on your behalf. Whether or not he knows you want it, whether or not you've commanded him to do it, if he's doing it on your behalf, that is an Isser Daraisa, a violation on a biblical level of Chilul Shabbos through the child doing Malacha in your home on your behalf. It's an unbelievable thing, no? It's a very scary thing. Based on what we just said, a parent is not allowed to allow a child, even below the age of Chinuch, you can't allow the child to perform a Malacha that the child knows is going to benefit you. Whether you've commanded him, you can't allow him to do that. You have to prevent him from doing so. That's how we paskin.
What if it doesn't benefit the parents?
If he's doing it for his own benefit.
For instance, he goes and turns on the light at his room.
Yes.
And then it's sleep time.
And then what? And then what?
He needs to go to sleep. So you tell him, what did you tell him?
Very good. We'll get to this. Very good. Excellent question, yeah. When it's more for the kid's benefit to go to sleep later, let's get to that B'li Neder towards the end. Very good. Some poskim do maintain, by the way, that even other adults have to stop the child if they know him to be... He just passed him a sheet? Yeah. If they know the child to be performing a malacha on behalf of their parents, you also have to stop them. So if you walk into a room and you see the kid is like, I don't know, preparing a gourmet meal for his parents, Habanim, my kids will do this for me on Shabbos or a weekday, prepare a gourmet meal for his parents, and you know he's doing it for the parents, do you have to stop the kid also, or is it only the parent's obligation? So probably midarabanan, obviously it's not as deraisa as lo saskom malacha atu v'in chavitecha, but some of the posts can do assume that you still have to stop that kid as well. Okay, that's not going to come up as often, obviously. One fascinating thing that's pointed out is that sometimes Rav Moshe Sternbach has this in a different Jew, in Beis Reish Hey, Chelik Beis of Chuvas and Hagos, him in Reish Hey, he writes that even though sometimes we assume if a person has a real case of doubt, a real suffix about whether something's a malacha that's usher or forbidden or not forbidden, so he has a suffix, so sometimes people will say to a kid to do the malacha, meaning it might not be a malacha anyways, we'll have a kid who's under the age of chinuch do it. So Rav Moshe Sternbach says it comes out from this, that's a terrible idea, because that's possibly an Isser Daraisa. If a kid does it and it turns out to be a malacha, it's an Isser Daraisa. You know it's better? If you're not sure if it's a malacha, do it klach hayad. Again, this is not halach l'maisa, so you have to ask a shayla when this comes up. But it's better to do it klach hayad with a shinoi in a changed, abnormal way, rather than have a kid do it, because doing something in an abnormal way, that's at best a darabanan. That's not going to be a daraisa. But if the kid does it and it ends up being a malacha, that's mamish an Isser Daraisa of Lo Saskom Malacha Ato Vin Chavitecha, like we just saw from the Mishkas Yankov, like we saw from the Mishnah Berurah, the Shulchan Aruch. That will be a problem on a Daraisa biblical level. Have the kid do it in an unusual way, maybe, although maybe it's better off at that point for you to do it because you understand it.
You benefit from it.
So we'll talk about benefit if we get there. B'li Neder, we'll talk about benefit if we get there. Very good. The Mishnah Berurah just makes a point over here. The Aruch HaShulchan makes the same point in a more emphatic way. Did I put the Mishnah Berurah on the sheet? I think source number 6. Yeah, source number 6. The Mishnah Berurah makes the following point, which is actually very important, and it changes our perspective on things. A kid, again, it's hard to pin down the age, but a kid at 4, a kid at 3, a kid at 5, there's very little that a kid does for themselves. Meaning, obviously they feed themselves and they play for themselves, they do things like that. But there are a lot of things they're going to do. They're going to turn on a light, they're going to open the fridge, they're going to, whatever the case might be. They're doing it often because they think it's the right thing to do that their parents want them to do. So you have to be very careful. Sometimes it's hard to tell, and the Aruch HaShulchan says you should always err on the side of caution here. It's hard to tell if a kid's doing something for himself or really for his parent. And if he's doing so for his parent, it'll be an Isser Daraisa. If he's doing it for himself, not so clear. And therefore, a person has to be very careful about trying to discern what the kid has in mind when he's doing whatever he might be doing on Shabbos. Again, that'll come up in different scenarios that maybe we'll talk about later on, some specific cases. We spoke in the past about whether women, mothers, have the obligation of chinuch. So the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa has a footnote in his introduction to the Sefer, Reb Neuvert, where he discusses whether women are mechuyav, whether they are obligated in the mitzvah, in the charge of la'afru shemei yisura, of making sure that a katan doesn't do yisurim. What he quotes is that the Minchas Chinuch says, regardless of whether they're chayiv in separating kids from yisurim in general, certainly when it comes to Shabbos, they're chayiv to separate kids from malacha. Meaning, even if you assume, I'm not saying it's halachically true, but even if you assume that a mother doesn't have the chiyuv to separate her kid from eating treif, to separate her kid from the McDonald's store, whatever the case might be, even if she doesn't have such an obligation, she absolutely does have to prevent the child from doing the Isser malacha on Shabbos, from doing malacha on Shabbos. Why? Why would that be different than every other case of Isser? Because what did we just say? Exactly. It's your Chilul Shabbos. Lo saskom malacha ata uvin chovitecha. anyone who's obligated in Shabbos, then everything that belongs to them, in quotes, everything that's theirs, their kids, their slave, their servants, whatever it might be, you have to make sure they don't do malacha in your home on Shabbos. So it says the Minchas Chinuch, a mother, even if she generally might not have this command, but when it comes to Shabbos, she does have to ensure that her child doesn't violate Shabbos on her behalf. So that's absolutely a fascinating ha'ara that the Minchas Chinuch has, and it makes a lot of sense according to the theme that we've developed until now. Yeah.
Sorry, I know I'm a little late, but just to clarify that point. So you're saying it's midoraita if you don't stop your kid from breaking Shabbos, or if you tell your kid to do something?
Right. If you tell your kid to do something for sure, and if you don't stop the kid and he's doing it on your behalf. If he's doing it on his own behalf, he wants to turn on the light so he could play in his room, that's different. But if he's doing it because he wants you to be able to see, you to be able to read, you to be able to eat, or whatever the case might be, even if you didn't tell him.
Like
exactly.
Is he reading a book? He says,
"Oh, he should really have the lights on." Yeah, exactly.
And he turns it on.
That would be an Isser D'Oraisa. Not you'd have to stop him. Correct. Now, one fascinating application of this, source number 7, you have it over here. It's related just to what we just said about women. That's why I'm putting it in this context. Rav Sternbach has a tshuva in Chelik Gimel of his Tshuvas on Hagos, where he writes about the following case. Let's say a woman lights Neros Shabbos. She lights candles for Shabbos. Whatever. So Shabbos Shkia is, what time is Shkia nowadays? 8:05, 8:10. Yeah, okay, 8:10. So she lights candles, terrible at math, but 7:52. 7:52. 18 minutes. Okay, give her 20 minutes to be careful. 7:50. Give her a half hour. That's really a good amount of time for Tosefes Shabbos. So she lights candles a half hour before Shkia. She lights candles 7:40. So that time from 7:40 until Shkia, is that Shabbos? For her, it's absolutely Shabbos. But it's really Tosefes Shabbos. It's really additional time of Shabbos. But technically speaking, Shabbos doesn't officially start until the second before Shkia, or simultaneously with Shkia, correct? So during that zone, from when she lit candles until Shabbos actually sets in fully for the whole world, with sunset, she can't do malacha. She already took in Shabbos. Can she ask a child in her house to do a malacha on her behalf?
I think the same thing applies.
So Moshe Sternbach says he was asked this question, and he thinks it depends on our very question. If the whole thing is just that the kid can't do malacha on Shabbos, it's not Shabbos for him. He didn't take him to have a Shabbos. But if the whole issue is no, it's your Shabbos, it's your Chil Shabbos to have the kid do malacha on your behalf, then even if it's not Shabbos for the kid, if it's Shabbos for you, you can't have your kid do it on your behalf. Isn't that amazing? The lumdus, like the theory that we're developing, it has practical application. It really comes to life in all these cases that we've discussed. It's an amazing thing.
You go to shul for early Shabbos, and your kid is at home.
Right, we have to discuss the details of when Shabbos sets in for someone who goes to shul early Shabbos, depending on the Neros or depending on you. But yes, exactly. If you were Makabel Shabbos early and you come home and your kid isn't up to that yet, you would not be allowed to ask him to do it on this, according to Moshe Sternbach. There are some posts more makel and say, no, it's not Shabbos for the kid. Come on, he doesn't have a chiyuv to keep Shabbos on Friday. But according to what we've developed until now, it's an isser of your Shabbos to have the kid do a malacha. That would apply even if it wasn't yet Shabbos for them, but it was Shabbos for you.
What's the halacha on that?
So Moshe Sternbach's machmir. He's stringent about this. Rav Harfinis quotes Rav Vosner was makel about this, but Rav Sternbach makes sense according to what we've said until now. Yeah, at the end of that shuva that we quoted from the Mishkas Yankiv, so he registers a very loud macha, a very big complaint, kol kore, against the people who are mezalzel in this din, that they don't keep this carefully, and they coax their children into doing malachos. Hopefully none of us have ever seen this in any homes, when the lights are off and we really want the lights to be on. I hope no one's ever witnessed it, but you take a child and they hold the hand next to the light and they hope they play with it, or sometimes they hold the hand and turn the light on. You know, you've seen, or haven't seen, hopefully, all of those sorts of permutations. So that's crazy. That's crazy. Of course that's not allowed. You can't cause a child to violate Shabbos. Causing a child to violate Shabbos is violating Shabbos. That's what we're learning here. So the Mishkas Yaakov has he's yelling at everyone to make sure not to do that. And the truth is, Reb Chaim Moser, who he started with, would also agree to that. You can't have a child violate Shabbos on your behalf. That's commanding him to violate Shabbos. That's not okay. For sure, forcibly moving his hand, that's absurd. Of course that can't work. You look in source number 8, the poskim do say, this is from the Orchos Shabbos, that if you have a child who's so young, you have in source number 8, you can read it inside, so young that he doesn't really understand Shabbos, he doesn't understand what his parents want or don't want. I don't know, it's hard to draw the lines here, but I have a child, I don't know how, between the age of 1 and 2, I think. So he's pretty young. So he has no idea. I mean, he's very, very bright for his age, in my opinion, but he has no idea what Shabbos is. He has no idea what Abba wants. He has no idea. He doesn't even really get what a light switch is until recently, because he's played with them so many times, not on Shabbos, that he sees they go on and off. But He has no concept of Shabbos or wants or wills of parents, anything like that. So if the child's so young and so tuned out, and he's young enough that he doesn't understand it's forbidden, and he doesn't understand that he's doing it for an adult, so in such a case, if you would hold the child near the light switch, and he would play around, and maybe you'd get lucky, hit the jackpot, and he would turn on the light or turn off the light, that would be permissible. Meaning, you can't hold a kid next to the light and say, turn on the light. You can't hold a kid next to the light who's old enough to understand that it's Shabbos and he's not allowed to turn on the light and have him turn on the light. You can't obviously tell the kid to turn on the light. You can't put his hand there actively. Those things are all insane and usher. Those are obviously usher, forbidden. But if the child is so young that he has no recognition of Shabbos, no recognition of the Isser, no recognition of what a father does or does not want, and you happen to hold him near a light switch and he plays around enough times and luckily the lights go on, that would be permissible according to most, not all, but most poskim, that becomes permissible. However,
Is this for Deorites only or Deorbanans?
meaning even Daraises you're saying? Even Daraises, meaning even if we assume it's an incandescent bulb when you're flipping on the light, that's Daraisa.
No, that I assume. I was.
Oh, the Isser you're saying. The Isser, yeah, for both. Correct, for
Because
both.
the light bulb, like,
Correct, for both. That's a very slippery slope, what we just said, because it's hard to tell what age it becomes inappropriate. It's very, very difficult to tell. I said about a kid who's 1.5 or 2 or whatever the age is. At 2, do they understand what a father wants? At 3, somewhere between 2 and 3, or 3 and 4. Yeah, it's very hard to tell, and it's something which is very scary because you're talking about an Isser Daraisa. Also, people can easily slip into coaxing the child into doing it. You get too close, and he's not doing it quick enough, and you're really under stress, you're really under pressure, you're having guests, you need the lights on, and you kind of move a little closer, inch up and down, move his hand so it's perfectly angled, and then you just like jump so that he hits it, all of a sudden you get a little bit too into it. It's very easy to slip over here. It's a very slippery slope, and you have to be very, very careful about it. But technically speaking, in a very serious case of need, such a situation would be permissible. If you had the right age of the kid, the right scenario, you'd be allowed to do that officially. Yeah.
If you, comparing that to the mother bringing in Shabbos early case, we're saying that it's midoraisa because it's for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does it matter if the kid understands or doesn't understand? At the end of the day...
No, because they don't understand. They don't understand they're doing it for you. It's not called doing it for you unless they know they're doing it for you. If a 1-year-old flips on a light, even though it benefits you, it's not the Isser is not the benefit. The Isser is that they did it for you. You can't say a 1-year-old did anything for you. He doesn't do anything for anyone. He just does.
Even though you put him there to do something for you.
Again, you put him in the vicinity, obviously, right? You didn't move his hands or manipulate him in any way. Yeah, even though you did that, he has no seichel. He has no understanding of what that means to do something for someone else. So it's not meaningful. Yeah. Yeah, based on everything we said above, so the following case is it's just funny that we're almost like more machmir in this sometimes. You walk into a room and you see your 3-year-old sitting on the floor coloring with a marker on Shabbos. So you yell, Shagitz, Shabbos, what are you doing, right? That's what you're supposed to yell at your kid. You're supposed to yell at your kids, I think, and tell them that on Shabbos. So we're having chinuch lessons here. So we yell at them, we say, don't draw, don't color on Shabbos. It's not so bad. I mean, the kids coloring for themselves. They're 3 years old. I mean, they're not necessarily at the age where they really understand Shabbos. Anyways, they have to teach them about the malacha. Maybe at 4, maybe at 3.5. It's not clear when. But tzarachin, why we're so always so careful about that. L'chorah, there are other things to be makbid on before that. But if the kid's doing it totally on their own behalf, and we're really not involved in any isser of lo saskom malacha, so tzarachin, why we'd have to yell at such a kid? Probably we don't have to yell at a kid in such a case.
You told my son, you're drawing something. It's Shabbat. He's like, he responded, I'm making it for you.
Oh boy.
Literally happens.
Then you take out the rocks. Yeah. In such a case, you got to teach them. So okay. So there are instances where we will actually allow for even utilize a child to do a malacha, and that's going to come back to your case from before. If you look in source number 9, the Bir Halacha quotes from a Rashba. We're not going to read it inside because he quotes the Rashba, then he goes back on it because he says that's not really what the Rashba means. He quotes Rabbi Akiva Eiger, who explains what the Rashba means. But when all the dust settles, what the Bir Halacha quotes from Rabbi Akiva Eiger and others say this as well, is that in a case where the child is below the age of chinuch, and you're only talking about an Isser Darabanan, so let's talk about your case. The lights are on in his room. Turning off lights is an Isser Darabanan. We'll leave that for now, but it's only rabbinic to turn off light switch. The lights are on in his room, and he needs to go to sleep. So who is he doing it for? Himself. He needs to go to sleep. It's his room, not your room, okay? He needs to go to sleep, so he's doing it for himself. It's an Isser Derabanan, and we're just allowing him or telling him to do it. In such a case, the Rashba, according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, says it would be permissible to allow the kid, have the kid do that on his own behalf, on a Derabanan, to turn off the lights in his room so he can go to sleep for himself.
Can you tell him directly? Or you have to
In that case, you'd be able to directly, yeah. I mean, I think so. I'm saying the hinting is more of a question by Amir La'akam. I understand why you might think that would be true here too, but here we'd be allowed to. The Be'er Lacha's words are Mutar afilu lisfos lo biyadayim. You could have him do it. You could, kind of direct him to do it in that way. We try to avoid as much as possible. Source number 10, the Chai Adam says it's only really if you're in a makam tzorech, you mamish don't have any other choice that you would do this. By the way, in such a case, the better option is that you tell a guy to turn off the lights. Okay, if you live in a community where there's really no non-Jews around and it's hard to find someone, fine. So you'll have the child do it. If he's under the age of Chinuch and it's for himself and it's a derabanan, fine.
In line, if it's for himself, if it's for you.
You don't want right. Okay, but the fact that you also are going to be happy that he sleeps is already not going to determine. He's doing it so he can go to sleep. But that is interesting, meaning what if the kid, he'd rather sleep in your room? Right, so you have to think about that. I don't know. You have to think if there are permutations like that. Yeah. The other case that comes up is,
But so in that case, you could tell your child to turn off.
in that case, you'd be able to, correct. If it's only for his benefit and it's derabanan and he's younger than the age of chinuch. Correct.
Derabanan meaning it's a fluorescent light.
Yeah, exactly. Or anything. Turning off even an incandescent bulb is mutar midarais. It's only as derabanan. It's a discussion for another time.
Off, right.
Off. On is worse. Yeah. Some of the poskim say that if you have a case of psik resha, let's say a classic case of psik resha, what psik resha means is that when you do one action, inevitably a malacha happens automatically. So, for example, the word psik resha means cut off head. What does that mean? So the Gemara's term is a funny term. Psik resha v'lo yamas. The Gemara says if you cut off a chicken's head, what happens? Yeah, well, really, it actually runs around a little bit first. But yeah, it ends up dying, correct? It ends up dying. So you cut off a chicken's head, it's going to die. So that's the term the Gemara uses to describe if you do something which is inevitably, obviously, automatically going to lead to something else. So when I cut off the head, it will obviously die. Similarly, here's an example. When I open the refrigerator, what's obviously going to happen? The light bulb will go on, correct? So that's a psik resha. I'm not doing a malacha, I'm opening a door. Opening a door is permissible on Shabbos. But when I open the door, inevitably, automatically, it's going to happen that the light switch is going to flick on and the bulb is going to be light in the refrigerator. So some of the poskim say that asking a child to do an act which is a psik resha, which will inevitably lead to a malacha, that's permissible as long as the child doesn't really understand what's going to happen. He doesn't understand that there's a malacha involved in the action that he's doing. And some of the poskim apply this to the case that we just said, a refrigerator. That if I think Rav Chaim Pinchas Steinberg, the quote says this, that if if you want the refrigerator to be open, but again they left the light. This happens to everyone their first Shabbos in a house or apartment. Every single person, their first Shabbos in their new home, they always leave the light bulb on in the fridge. They open the fridge, and they're like, uh-oh, we got to get the food out, but now the fridge is open. What do? You have to find the super. If you're in an apartment building, you have to find the guy down the block or something to close the fridge, to take out the light bulb for your Rav says you could take out the light bulb if they tell the non-Jew to do on Shabbos, and then from then on you never forget. Until you move to your next home, then you forget again. But always the first thing you should do when you move into a home, take out the light bulbs from the fridge. Nobody needs them. You don't need a light bulb in the fridge. You can see perfectly well. The other thing you should do in every Jewish home is get rid of onions. They only cause issues. You cut an onion with the wrong knife, you ruin your whole kitchen. So no onions and no light bulbs in the fridge. Can we do that? Can we accept that upon ourselves? Okay. So no light bulbs in the fridge, but you open the fridge and you realize the light's on, and or now the fridge is closed and you want to get it open. So what Chaim Pinchas Steinberg suggests, if the kid is so young that he doesn't realize opening a fridge means light bulbs go on, maybe you could actually ask him to open the fridge, because it's just a psik resha, it's automatic, but he's not actually intending to do so. Others are machmir on this. Dayan Falk was machmir on this because, according to the Chazon Ish, electricity is daraisa. We're talking about a daraisa over here, but even if you hold this derabanan, some are machmir on this anyways, and the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach suggests, don't tell him to open the fridge. Tell him, do you want yogurt, or what else, what do they eat? Cucumbers, do you want cucumbers? Go to the fridge, get cucumbers for yourself. So what have you just done? Probably a derabanan, electricity, if you don't hold like the Chazon Ish. You're telling a young child to do a psik resha on a maybe derabanan. Okay, maybe deraisa, maybe derabanan for himself. Then it's over. You say, wait, let me just get my beer out of there. Okay, fine. Now you get your stuff too. But you've commanded him to do something that's for his benefit. That's very low level. That's a psik reisha. It would probably be permissible. Rav Harfness lean towards chumrah on this, but he says b'makom tzorech if you really need that beer. So it's long Shabbos these days. Long Shabbos. So you really need that beer. So you'd be allowed to utilize that kula in such a case, or maybe even be make like Rav Chaim Pinchas Steinberg, as we said before, that allows the kid to open it in the first place for you. That's subject to debate. The last thing we'll end with, and we'll try to touch on the parsha just for a brief moment, is what if a katan does malacha for you on Shabbos? He's not allowed to do malacha for you on Shabbos. That's what we spent the first 35 minutes or however long we've been here talking about. He's not allowed to do a malacha on your behalf on Shabbos. What if he does so? What if he does so? Are you allowed to benefit from it? So generally speaking, if a non-Jew does a malacha for us on Shabbos, we know the halacha is, or even if, a Jew does malacha for us on Shabbos, there are various instances, if you did it accidentally, on purpose, when you're allowed to benefit, when you're not allowed to benefit. But ultimately speaking, if a malacha was done inappropriately for you on Shabbos, you are not allowed to benefit from that malacha. If someone cooked something for you, you can't benefit from that malacha either that day, until that night an hour later when they could have done the malacha after Shabbos, or forever, depending on the case and depending on the opinion that you're going in. The details aren't so important right now. What we want to know about is not an adult Jew, not an adult non-Jew, but a minor, a katan, a young child in your home that does a malacha on your behalf inappropriately. So are you allowed to benefit from that malacha? So if you look in source number 11, the Be'er Halacha quotes from the Magen Avram, who says that if you have a katan who does some malacha for you on Shabbos, if he did it on your behalf, you can't benefit from it. If he did it on his own behalf, you'd be allowed to benefit from it. Now that's logical, meaning if on Shabbos you're not allowed to benefit from the malacha itself, if the katan did it for himself, it's not a problem, so you can benefit from it. But if he did it for you, it's a regular malacha, and it's maybe even your malacha. It's maybe even in a way, it's a chilul Shabbos of an adult. So it's sensible that you wouldn't be allowed to benefit from it. But if he did it for himself, nothing really happened, so you'd be allowed to benefit from it. What the poskim talk about that's so interesting, all the poskim quote this funny story, that a father asked his son to plug in the hot plate, the plata, before Shabbos. The son forgot to plug in the hot plate. On Shabbos night, whatever, he realized, Gevalt Geschrigen, I forgot to put in the hot plate. So he knows his father's going to be very, very angry with him. He's going to be very upset. So he's scared. He doesn't want to get punished. So what does he do on Friday night? Plugs in the hot plate. So in such a case, did the katan do the malach for himself, or did he do it for the father? So on the one hand, he did it for the father. The father's the one who wanted it plugged in. On the other hand,
did it for himself. The father asked him to do it when it was...
And he's trying to avoid punishment. Yeah, exactly. He's trying to get a punishment. So exactly. Very good. So this is what the poskim argue about. They say, how do you judge? It's kind of related to your question before the beds, right? How do you judge what the kid's intent was? Was he doing for himself to avoid punishment? He doesn't want to get thrown in his room for the whole Shabbos because there's no chillent. Or he did it for his father because he wants his father to have a good meal. How do you judge that? So this is a machlokas. Rav Chaim Kanievsky has an opinion, or Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has an opinion. It doesn't usually come up all that often. One thing that they should all agree upon, that Piskei Teshuvos points out, is that if he plugged in the hot plate and the food got hot, if you took it off the hot plate and waited a few minutes till it got warm, till it got cold, I should say, now everyone would agree you could benefit from it because no one's using hot food anymore. You're not benefiting from the hot plate if you let it cool down. So in such a case, we'd be mekel. But generally speaking, it's a machlokas poskim whether that's considered letzorech himself or letzorech the father. So that points to the discussion that we started and stopped a few times, which is how do you determine what the das of the child is and who he's doing it for, which is an interesting discussion to continue with another time as well. But that's the general idea. Is that there's an isser on Shabbos for you to do malacha, there's an isser on Shabbos if you allow your child to do malacha, and the details we discussed therein are going to play into the lumdus, the understanding, the theme that we developed, that's really your isser Shabbos to allow the child to do the malacha. We'll stop here and maybe we'll just make a comment about the parsha, which is our minhag.
When you're a kid, you have a guest. The kid turn off the lights, and it's very uncomfortable.
Okay.
And it's embarrassing you also in a way also. So you could tell the kid indirectly.
What, to turn on? I don't think so. Doesn't sound right. I don't think so. That's for everyone else.
But it's for Sibur also.
That we don't have a heter of telling a right. That's the better idea, or a guy. Only no. That halacha, if it applies by a guy, not by a child. To tell a non-Jew to do it. Even that's debatable. What's considered a tzibur? So you have to figure that out. Yeah, not so simple. In Parshas Matos, we read the famous story that Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain are on the cusp of entering Eretz Yisrael with all the rest of the Jewish people, and they say, "Not so fast, Moshe Rabbeinu." They say, "We see this land over here on the other side of the Yarden. It's very luscious. It's very beautiful. It's perfect for our flock. We have a tremendous amount of cattle that we want to protect, and it's in our best financial interests to stay on this side of the Yarden." So they say, "Moshe Rabbeinu, thanks but no thanks. We don't want to go to Eretz Yisrael." And Moshe Rabbeinu just rips into them. I mean, he gives them the Musar Shmuz of a lifetime, no? He's yelling at them that you guys don't want to go and fight with your brothers. Your brothers are going to go do battle, and you're going to stay here lazy on the other side of the river and not fight with them. And you're just like the Meraglim who said that Eretz Yisrael wasn't worth it, and you want to stay outside of Eretz Yisrael. You're worse than them. Your Hashem is going to unleash His wrath on you. You're going to, the same way people died in the desert, you're going to die. They're going on and on. Terrible, ripping into them, making them feel terrible about their request to stay on the other side of the river. And the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven sit there patiently, they listen, they wait, and they say, okay, they take it in. And the Psukim tells, they come back to Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayikshu Elav, they come back to him, and they say, that's not what we meant. We meant that we're going to build some, places for our cattle to frolic over here on the other side of the river. We're going to come to Eretz Yisrael. We're going to suit up. We're going to put on the armor. We're going to take weapons. We're going to go against the non-Jews. We're going to conquer Eretz Yisrael. We're going to fight alongside our brothers. We're going to stand with our brothers, the army of the Jewish people. Then, after we win the war, we're going to come back. We never were going to abandon the Jewish people. Now, aside from the fact that the conclusion of the story is ambiguous, were they right or were they wrong, you see a very, very, very fascinating, strange theme here. The whole time Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain meant that they're going to go fight the war, and then they're going to come back to the other side and live over here. They never meant to abandon their brethren. They never meant to give up on the Jewish people. They were always going to fight alongside and do battle with everyone in Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, misunderstood. He thought they meant they were going to abandon the rest of the army, and therefore he starts yelling at them and giving them musar. And what do? They just take it. They just listen. But they know what they meant. Why didn't they say, well, Moshe, before you get all angry, let me just clarify what we meant. What we meant is first we're going to fight, and then we're going to come back. Moshe say, oh, okay, good, I didn't want to lose my voice anyways. This is perfect, I don't have to yell at you. Why did they sit there and listen to the musar the whole time? They just let Moshe Rabbeinu give them the shmuz. They didn't deserve the shmuz. They didn't need the musar. They didn't actually think what Moshe Rabbeinu thought they thought. So why are they sitting there and listening to this diatribe by Moshe Rabbeinu, yelling at them for what they never really intended in the first place? So there's an amazing story with Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz. Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz was the mashgiach in Mir. So Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, who eventually was Rosh Yeshiva in the Mir, so Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz was younger at the time, and he was a big masman. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz was a huge masman, a huge Talmid Chacham. But one time, he was sick. He was very ill. He had the flu for 2 weeks, and he didn't come into the Beis Medrash for 2 weeks. He was too sick. He couldn't make it to learn. And after 2 weeks passed by, so he went to the Beis Medrash, and Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz, the mashgiach, was there, and he said to Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, he said, "Where have you been? I mean, we've had Seder the last 2 weeks, and you aren't here. You lazy. You're slacking off. You're falling into other things. You're not going to be matzliach and learning. A 30-minute musar shmuz." Rabbi Yerucham was the Baal Musar. He was the mashgiach, so he gave him a musar shmuz. And Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, after Rabbi Yerucham finished, he politely said, "Rabbi, I feel bad, but I was sick. I was sick. I couldn't come to the basement. I don't need musar. I was sick." And Rabbi Yerucham said, "You don't think I knew you were sick? You're the biggest masman in the yeshiva. I knew that if you didn't come in, there was a good reason, and the boys told me you had the flu. I was well aware that you were sick. But you still need musar. You know why? Because even if you're sick, and even if there's an excuse, and even if there's a reason that this musar doesn't apply to you, probably somewhere deep down, there's some flaw. Maybe you enjoyed being sick a little too much. Maybe you liked the extra sleep you were getting. Maybe you could have been back an hour before you ended up coming back. I don't know what the level, what the nuance is, but somewhere deep down, this musar can register. True, you were sick, but does that mean you can't improve? Does your excuse really cover every angle of every action, every feeling that you went through in the last 2 weeks? So I gave you the musar because even if it doesn't apply to you on its face, even if the value isn't so obvious, some kernel of that musar is going to touch you somewhere deep down and make you realize you didn't do something perfectly and you can change for the better. Say Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, we know that we never intended to stay here. We were always going to fight alongside Klal Yisrael. But let Moshe Rabbeinu talk. Because somewhere in that musar shmuz, something's going to register. And we know from Chazal that's true. The Medrash tells us that the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, they made a mistake. They were too focused on wealth. They wanted to accumulate massive riches. They wanted to become tremendously wealthy, and that was a mistake that they had made. Or as Rashi tells us, they looked at the Iker as Tafel, the Tafel as Iker. They cared more about their money than Eretz Yisrael. There are so many things that the Mefarshim talk about in terms of what they did wrong. It's nuanced. It's not what Moshe Rabbeinu was talking about on his face, but something in that Musar registered. Something in that Musar spoke to them deep down. We go through so many Musar shmoozes. We hear a drasha, we hear a shir, we hear someone yelling at us, we are our wife giving us the business sometimes, and we think it doesn't apply to us. And you know what? On one level, you might be right. It might not apply to you. This Musar might not be exactly what you need right now. But something in the speech, something in the drasha has to register on some level. Everything we hear can be a musar. And you know what? It's more than that. I was talking to my friend today, a colleague, a rabbinic friend, who said that he just talked about this recently in a shul, a brilliant idea. He said, you look at the Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos, and you see, have a Ratz Katzvi and Az Kanamer, what else? Gibor Ka'ari. You should be strong like a lion, fast like a leopard. You should act in the way of Kal Kanesher, right? You should act in a way like animals. So these are beautiful messages that come from the that we learn lessons from the animals around us. But what he pointed out is so fascinating. You know what that means? It means when these Tanaim who wrote these Mishnayos, when they went to the zoo, you and I, we go to the zoo. We are just killing hours with our kids. These Tanaim went to the zoo and they saw the animals and they said, "What can I learn from this animal?" You don't want to be a lion. You don't want to be a tiger. You don't want to be a leopard. You don't want to be an eagle. You don't want to be an animal. You want to be a human being. But there's something to learn here. There's some message. There's something this animal is doing that's going to teach me. There's a whole book about this for kids. Yassi and Nasi's trip to the zoo or something like that, where they learn the lessons from the animals. The point isn't the lessons. The point is that look at the character of our Tanaim. That they took everything as a Musar Shmuz. Not just when Moshe Rabbeinu gave them a Shmuz, when Rabbi Yocham Levavitz gave a Shmuz to Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, but even an animal, the way it acts in the zoo, the way that the Gemara in Eruvin tells us to learn from every animal, all the midos the Torah has for us, we could have learned from the animals as well, because everything around us has a message for us. So we should take the message of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, even when it doesn't feel like we deserve Musar, even when it doesn't feel like the messages are directed at us, there's something deep down, there's a kernel that we can pick up from the Musar Shmuz, or even from the animals on the street, even from the zoo. We could find the message that speaks to us and use that to motivate us to become better people, to grow from the Musar that we see, and not only hear Musar, but actually seek out Musar all around us. Okay? Everyone have a wonderful rest of the week.